Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph de Amicis, and today we're at Buena Vista's Champagne Caves in Sonoma Valley. And I'm speaking with George Weber, a good friend, a brilliant historian. He plays the count here at the winery, and he is really what I would call a tourism philosopher. He has wonderful insights about it. And we're going to talk about the transformation of this building, this historic building, and the evolution of the tourism program they've put together here. So George, thank you for taking the time to talk with me about this. And you've seen the transformation of this building, these Champagne Caves, from when it was unusable as a winemaking facility to now when it's once again a producing facility, as well as a hospitality center. So tell me a little bit about that transformation.
Sure. Jean-Charles Boisset bought Buena Vista in May of 2011, and he was told because of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, this building had not been retrofit back in 1982 as the first building was, and so in 1989 the building damaged to the point it was closed to the public for 23 years. Jean-Charles Boisset told that even a moderate earthquake would bring the damaged building to the ground. He launched a 9-month earthquake retrofit program starting in January of 2012. It cost many millions of dollars. Scaffolding was placed around the entire building. Many of your listeners or viewers will remember the ivy that grew on the outside of the building, which was quite beautiful, but it was killing the building, so all the ivy removed, scaffolding built. 30 workmen spent many months chiseling out the old mortar and cement, putting new in, and then they removed the rotten roof completely, drilled down in the middle a 6-inch wide hole with a diamond drill from top to bottom, put steel rods into the hole, poured epoxy and cement in. It took 2 months to dry, eventually fusing the steel to the stone. The steel rods are every 4 feet around the entire building.
That was a very long drill.
38 feet from top to bottom. And so done by September of 2012. And because of the retrofit, this building was not destroyed by the August of 2014 South Napa quake, although the seismic engineers told us if we had not done the retrofit, it would be lost to history, a pile of rubble.
You know, people in the area, including Hess and including Sebastiani, suffered a lot of damage. And they're actually, Sebastiani's a little north of here, so this building must have really taken the shaking.
Unquestionably. The retrofit is rated now to a 9.0.
Oh my gosh.
Which is really a big quake.
Yeah, really. Now, at that point you have the structural materials taken care of. What did they decide to do then with the interior? How are you going to use the interior? I mean, there's the winemaking part of it, but this is much more than just a winemaking building.
Thank you. Well, on the first floor, we have the caves that still exist. And because the caves in back of the first building collapsed in the '06 earthquake, and they didn't, the caves in the back of this building, dug right into the Mayacama, are the most important historic wine caves in California, 1862. Now, we have something called the Buena Vista Bubble Lounge on the first floor.
Right.
We have a variety of other endeavors, things for people to do. We have a blending seminar in the Cave of Curiosities. We do barrel tastings. We do library tastings. And we are making wine on the first floor in 85 hectoliter French Burgundian oak fermenting tanks. Open top fermenters. We process about 70 tons of grapes here every year. We bring the 2-ton hampers right to the front of the building. We have a sorting table, a crusher destemmer. We use natural yeast fermentation. It only takes about 2 weeks for red wine to ferment. We will use those fermentation tanks for over 100 years.
Really?
Yeah.
I was very interested that he decided to use, you know, the wooden tanks, which I know are popular for very high-end wines, but we see so much stainless steel in this region. But these are really quite beautiful.
Boutique winemaking, only intended for red wine, so we don't do any white in those tanks. Old-fashioned Burgundian techniques.
Right.
A manual pigeage rather than a pump over.
Really?
Our desire is soft and supple tannins. We don't want oxidation, sharp, extracted tannins. So we do a manual pigeage with a pigeage tool, pumping down by hand on the cap. A lot more work, a lot more expense, but a great joy to be making wine here again. Made wine in this building from 1864 to 1878, and from 1947 until 1979 when they stopped making wine in this building, and we began again in 2012, as soon as the retrofit was done.
Where were the original vineyards in Buena Vista?
So if you go to Bartholomew Park across the creek, there are the great vineyards, the ones that were left, although by 1866 the Count had over 500 acres of grapevines, and the roads Castle Road and Old Winery Road, all the vineyards you see on Old Winery Road were on the original estate. Castle Road going down is also of the original estate, all the way to 7th Street East.
Ah.
Yeah, those were all the vineyards.
Now I remember when the previous owners of Buena Vista, many of their vineyards were in the Carneros district.
Buena Vista, under a group called the Mularacas from 1979 to 2001, were one of the groups that really led the charge to Carneros. This was really worked on by Andrei Chelischev, who was the winemaker at Buena Vista from 1973 until 1994. And Andrei was the one who was one of the people that said, let us stop growing the thin-skinned, early ripening grapes, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in Central Napa Valley. It's too hot, let's go down by the bay. So that was one of his legacies. And by around 1995, the Mularacas had over 1,500 acres of grapevines in the Rommel Road vineyard.
Now, I know the offices for Buena Vista are on the floor that we're in. In fact, we're in the lounge off of this, and this is new to me. The last time I was here, this was all offices. What are you using this space for?
We use this for VIP guests, for filming television shows for local television stations. We have meetings here with our staff, lunches.
Nice.
It is very nice.
It's very comfortable.
Quite.
Yeah. Now, on the top story, you have the new museum.
Yes.
And that's quite a collection. I had seen it in process when it was much simpler, and there were some tools up on the walls. Now it's turned into quite an unusual museum.
Thank you.
And what was the thinking behind that? I mean, I know Jean-Charles is a great collector.
Well, 10 years ago, Jean-Charles' father, Jean-Claude Boisset, who is the leader of the Boisset Collection, a family-owned company with 17 wineries in France, 5 in America. Jean-Claude purchased a museum from an eccentric Frenchman named Philippe Bérard, who had spent 30 years collecting vinicultural tools, arranging them in artistic patterns upon the walls of a space that's in Burgundy. It's called the Imaginarium. You can visit it to this day. There is a 20-minute presentation that uses the story of the tools to tell the larger story of the history of wine and how wine is made. And so 1/3 of that collection came here. We put it up on the top floor. We changed the video presentation to make it more Buena Vista, California wine-centric. There is a voiceover by a man who sounds remarkably like myself. And so there it is. It's a 19-minute presentation. Some of the tools move. There are lights on them. And it is really an interesting presentation that tells the story of wine through its tools.
One thing that always amazes me about the Boisset style and the various different wineries, because I go through all three. I was at the Loche the other day, I was at Raymond the other day, I come here, is the love of mannequins.
Yes. Jean-Charles is fond of mannequins.
I've noticed that, and they're elaborately dressed mannequins.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
We have a mannequin lady.
Oh, really? A
Yes.
specialist?
Oh, yes.
Who would ever thought when she was applying for jobs originally, they were
Well, she doesn't work for us full time. She's a for-hire mannequin lady.
Oh, this is a career choice.
Assumedly so. The tail is wagging the dog. You can make money doing anything as long as people know about you.
That's true. That's true. Like some speakers in hospitality, apparently. Walking in and seeing all these dark characters around this dark table was a little spooky.
It is spooky. We sometimes place one of our period clothed guides down along the mannequins and try not to give anyone, a conniption fit, but a nice, gentle surprise.
This may be the only tour I can think of that's done in period costume.
I'm not aware of another.
No, and I've been on, hundreds and hundreds of tours around the county.
I'm sure. There's historic wineries, and there's our winery. 700 wineries in Sonoma County, plus, last count, 462 tasting rooms in Sonoma County. Most winery stories are not that interesting.
True.
I mean, an average winery story sounds like this. 40 years ago, a nice gentleman made money in insurance, was interested in wine, bought some land, hired a UC Davis winemaker. He makes a wine. He has a nice family. This is Susie wine.
Yes.
That's it.
That's the whole
That's
story.
that whole story. Now, so we are fortunate to have history here, the real story.
Yeah, and even the story like that is made better by pouring wine, of course.
Sure, I mean, it's a farming enterprise. Many wineries really don't have much of a story. And then, of course, they're the scourge of our industry, the so-called lifestyle category.
Yes.
Wines whose labels have nothing to do with wine. Middle Sister, Little Black Dress,
Right.
Skinny Girl. There are states where it's against the law for a skinny girl to purchase a bottle of Skinny Girl, but no one's ever tried it, so it doesn't matter.
So like Cupcake, a very popular
Cupcake?
brand. Exactly. Yeah.
You could go on and on. We killed the animals off.
Yes.
We ran out of animals.
Yes.
And then we got lifestyle brand.
Well, it's interesting because there are other wineries that are very close to this period. You have the Charles Krug Winery, of course. You have Schramsberg. You have the Grimm Winery, which is now Storybook Mountain. But this is definitely the most elaborate educational tourism program in both valleys.
Well, I thank you, and this is what we do here because we have this amazing history, and I was hired to create historical themed tours and to tell people the story of this amazing character. And so it's been a great joy to bring history to people.
Now, you deal with the same kind of thing I deal with as a tour guide, is that at the beginning of the tour, they are different people than they are at the end of the tour because the entire time they've
For
been
sure.
drinking.
That's a good point.
And do you find your presentation shifting as the day goes on because they start becoming a little more, as the time goes on? Because you're with them maybe 90 minutes.
Yeah, or 2 hours sometimes. I love what I do. It is the world of hospitality. And you and I were talking earlier about the true hospitality. It's all about being emotionally vulnerable. You would call it emotionally plastic or becoming whatever they would want us to be. And this is our goal as an industry. It is a fine thing. People that don't care about our industry, well, I ask them to go work somewhere else.
Yes. Well, it's an interesting juxtaposition with Bosset, and he really has these two sides because on one side, if you go to Raymond, it's a very elaborate, phantasmagorical,
very good, sir.
And this is said with affection, and then
certainly,
and then you come here, and it's a very authentic, very historic experience. That's two complete sides of the coin. I mean, they're both hospitality.
Yeah, and every one of our, Deloach is biodynamic, the world of biodynamic. Jean-Charles loves signs because it's edutainment.
Yes.
If you were to go to Buena Vista, read every one of our history signs, and there are lots.
Yes.
And then you went to Deloach and you read every one of the signs on biodynamic. There are over 80 of them. If you went to Raymond and went through the Theater of Nature and did the same thing, by the end, it would take you many hours, and you would understand biodynamic completely.
Yes.
And you would know the history of the Count and the history of this winery and California wine history in general. So this is what we do. It's edutainment. It's an almost insidious form of learning. We want people to walk away thinking, I had fun, but you know what? I have been thinking about interesting and important topics for the last 2 hours, and that is wow. And this is part of what we must do. We must do as an industry more than just stand behind a counter and pour an ounce of wine for $10 an ounce, which is upsetting to our visitors and is an example of wineries owned by corporations that do not care about people at all.
Right. as you might know, I'm doing a 3-part series now on biodynamics, and one of the people I'm interviewing is your gardener at Raymond, and this has been a fascinating experience.
It really is interesting.
Because I spent 6 months to a year studying biodynamics to preparing for the series, so I knew what kind of questions to ask.
Of course, Ralph, this is not separate from your other studies as well.
No.
It's all of a piece.
Yeah, it's got it. Yes.
And that is the interesting thing, I think. How does the world of Rudolf Steiner intersect with the world of the cosmos?
Yes.
And some of his deepest writings are still not entirely understood and may never be entirely understood. No. There is a rhythmic dance component. Have you heard about that?
Oh, yes, I know.
Yeah, it's about rhythmic dances by humans upon the earth that will affect the actual physicality of the fruits and vegetables. That's a little esoteric.
Well, it's very interesting if you think about taking a building like this, which is so tied into the history of winemaking. And the history of winemaking is the history of culture, because it takes so many people to do it. It takes so long to do it. It's, many times an entire community has to put together their wine. Take a building like this, which is so historically important, that's been left almost empty for many years, and suddenly you have an infusion of people who are coming into the building every single day, either working here or, making their lives here in one way or another, or coming for tours. You're really injecting this history with life force, and it has to make it resonate.
Thank you. Of course. Well, it's a wonderful thing. Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, and then you continue to see it, I think, in that the message of biodynamics seems to be going wider and wider and wider. I keep running into it in more and more places. People who wouldn't have admitted before they did biodynamics, it's the first thing that comes out of their mouth now.
It is an inexorable force. It does create better fruits and vegetables. The proof is in the pudding. We're getting very nice scores. The scores don't come out of nowhere.
True.
This is not subjective. These are objective scores by wine professionals who can taste the difference with grapes grown biodynamically than using chemical fertilizers and pesticides. That's the point. Then of course we go into all of the fact that winery owners are caring individuals, stewards of the land. They don't want to see chemicals go into the creeks, into the bay. Right. The Napa River continues to be healthier than it has been. 100 years ago, it was really pretty bad.
Essentially, because you were the person who was brought in, and I remember the story of you walking down the street and bumping into Jean-Charles as he was talking about, there's this guy
Yeah,
in town.
It's a pretty interesting story.
And so it's been your responsibility to a certain extent to be a guide to the guides who you've brought on.
Yes.
Have you been involved in their selection as well?
I am not the manager of Buena Vista. When we're thinking of hiring prospective guides, I usually talk to them so they can get my input. One of the things that's interesting about our world of hospitality is that it is the most important thing we cannot teach them. And it is not always easy to tell before we hire them, which is interesting if you consider personalities. And once again, the true spirit of hospitality is to have it not be about us. People save money for years to come to wine country. We tend to forget how beautiful it is here. We're here every day. If you're from the plains of Nebraska, just being in Sonoma is amazing. They are happy to be here. Right. It is our obligation as providers of touristic experiences to make it about them. Right. So, for instance, when people come into the winery, we tell them the story of our winery. We talk about the wine. We don't talk about the day we're having. It doesn't matter. We have had people we've hired that simply refuse to understand this simple fact of employment. Let's not talk about ourselves.
Well, it's funny too.
And then they have to go. There's nothing we can do. We can't teach them.
Right, exactly, because it is about the client and their experience. 'Cause
Yes.
You're right. People come from all over the world, and they've been looking forward to coming here for years sometimes.
Yes, and this is a great and glorious thing. We are fortunate beyond belief to be able to have this historic destination, Sonoma County, all its myriad splendors. We deliver very good hospitality. It's a wonderful industry, and people that don't like it, I'm not happy with them.
Right, they can do something else.
Well, I don't want people to come to their town, but let's be honest, Sonoma is a tourist town.
Yes.
It has been since 1906, when the Mission became one of the first state parks. In 1906, a group called the California League for Historic Preservation, that's not the exact title, the California League something, Phoebe Hearst and others put down $5,000, and on one day they bought the Mission, Sutter's Fort, and Fort Ross. And 6 months later, they transferred control to what became California State Parks in 1906. Wow. So the Mission in Sonoma has been open ever since then for daily tours. That's a long time for a state park. And so Sonoma been a tourist town ever since. And historical tourism has been the driver. In the mid-1990s, during one of the economic downturns, the Sonoma State Historic Parks was closed on Wednesdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the resultant decrease in business was so extreme that the merchants in the city of Sonoma begged state parks to reopen in the middle of the week.
Interesting. Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
And so they did. They did reopen.
I tell my clients that Sonoma in many ways is the most historic spot in California because it's the 21st and northernmost mission.
Yes.
It is one of the 6 pueblos, official cities. It is one of the presidios as well. It's the only town that was all 3. It was the home of the Bear Flag Rebellion.
Yes.
And it is the point where the Spanish Empire met the Russian Empire's southern tip. It's where those 2 empires met.
You could think of it this way. One road from Mexico City to Guatemala, from Mexico City to Sonoma.
Yeah.
One road from Guatemala north to Sonoma, and that's it, the end of the road. And not just of the Spanish Empire or the Mexican government, but also, in a sense, the Roman Empire.
True.
Going all the way back so Western civilization, influenced by the Romans through the various incarnations, the notion of a plaza in the middle of the town. This is a Roman. This is a Roman notion. And so here we are, Sonoma. My friend Robert Demler, a local historian, believes that Spain Street is the single most historic street in California, as it is on the east. It is framed by Sebastiani Historic Winery. As you move west, you come by the Rey Adobe, which was the officers' quarters for the U.S. Army in 1850. William Tecumseh Sherman lived in that house in 6 months of 1850. Then we have the Blue Wing Inn, we have the Mission, we have the barracks, and then we have General Vallejo Home State Park.
Exactly.
All of these on one street, Spain Street.
Now we're going to transition into a small section where George Weber, in his role as the Count of Buena Vista, talks about the transformation of the property.
Yes, thank you. Well, this building started in 1864, and it was the second stone winery building built in California, as the building prior to us, about 150 yards away, is the first stone winery building. And so this building was finished by 1867. Now, in 1982, the first building, the press house on Buena Vista, was retrofit for future violent earth disturbances. This large building was not retrofit.
Oh.
And in 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake shook this building so severely, it was closed for 23 years. In May of 2011, Jean-Charles Boisset bought this winery and brought myself back to life. And he was told even a moderate trembler would bring this historic wine building to the ground. In January of 2012, he launched a 9-month earthquake retrofit and restoration, and it was done by September. He used a different technique than the first building. We didn't want to mar the outside of the building with the steel rods and the washers that go through on the outside. So first what we did was we repointed and polished every one of the original limestone blocks. We had built a scaffolding around this entire huge building. And then we removed the rotten roof completely and removed the roof and drilled down from the top a 6-inch center cut hole from top to bottom and placed steel rods and rebar into the hole. We poured epoxy and cement in to the hole. It took 2 months to dry, eventually fusing the steel to the stone. And the steel rods are every 4 feet around the entire building from top to bottom, and so the walls themselves are load-bearing. Then a brand new roof, brand new wooden floors, brand new electrical, plumbing, water. It is essentially a new building, but it is the same building as it was in 1864.
And you actually installed a winery.
Yes, we began making one in 2012. The last time wine made in 1979 here in this historic winery building. Inside we have 6 4.5-ton French Burgundian oak fermenting tanks. We have a press. We do all the functions of a winery right in this building, aging our wines in French, American, and Hungarian oak barrels. And most of the wine made here is part of our Vinicultural Society wine. Vinicultural Society.
Which is the original name.
The name of, yes. Sadly, the part of the story that's sad is I sold the majority interest of my winery to this corporation. The first agricultural corporation of its size in California's history.
Right.
Required a special act of the legislature. Jean-Charles Boisset, our owner, is a passionate believer in history and in biodynamic agriculture. Agriculture using specific agricultural practices described by Rudolf Steiner, the amazing German who invented what's called the Steiner method. We now call it Waldorf schools, and also it is a cosmology of agriculture, art, education, dance, all together in a unified theory that frankly not everyone understands, or really no one understands. We use specific practices, and the point is to avoid chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and using the natural forces of the earth, cosmos, the stars, the moon. We bury a cow horn filled with cow manure during a full moon, allow it to compost in the vineyard. We dig it up at a special time, and we make a tincture or tea out of the manure, tea which is applied to the plants, and it's really quite remarkable, all the things we do. And this really works, and no pesticides or chemical fertilizers.